Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
The mannequin. These inert figures are used to display clothes or other items in a lifelike display to entice the shopper. We can pose these human-like forms into anything the display calls for, and they'll never talk back, never change their pose. Without surprise, these mindless human shapes would become a draw for people's dark fantasies. Devoid of life and soul, many serial killers have developed a fascination with mannequins, most notably Jeffrey Dahmer or David Ray Parker, alias the Toy Box Killer. But for the residents of a small suburb south of Baltimore, Maryland, the mannequin would come to be a symbol of terror amidst a murder spree that ran between 1979 and 1989. For an entire year, dismembered mannequins were found smeared with blood and stabbed with knives as bizarre forewarnings of murders that would occur soon thereafter. Sometimes on the very same road the mannequins were found on. While police stressed they did not believe the two events linked, for residents of Elkridge, Maryland, what would be dubbed the Mannequin Murders would cast a shadow of terror across the region that would not see a face to their boogeyman until 1991. But it would take a further 25 years to convict him of any more than one of the murders. And even now, the killer behind the Mannequin Murders remains suspected of more killings.
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one,
The death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
If you know Ruin Road, you know we value our privacy. But in our personal life, it's not always easy to maintain. Whether we know it or not, sites will mine our data like full name, email, health records, and more, which they will sell to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who wants to snoop. That's why we started using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows us which data brokers are selling our personal information and automatically submits opt-out requests on our behalf. This not only reduces the amount of spam you'll get, but protects against hackers who can use this information to gain access to our social media, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also provides a ton of other features bundled into one easy-to-use app at an affordable price. You get antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more without needing to bother with different apps. We all have one or more of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. And if you're a regular viewer, you'll know how often that happens. Like 24-hour security, motion sensors, and guard dogs, Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping my info safe so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. Relaxing. Ruin Road values our privacy, and we also value yours. Go to aura.com/ruinroad to start a free 2-week trial, also linked below in the description. Nestled in the heart of Maryland, Elkridge is an unincorporated community in Howard County, just below Baltimore. In the 1960s and 70s, families looking to escape the hustle and bustle of the city began flocking to the suburbs, with Elkridge being one of the more desirable locations. US Route 1 and later Interstate 95 would provide quick and easy access into the city in less than 30 minutes. But off the main road, neighborhoods were quiet and close-knit, with just around 8,000 residents living here in the 1980 census. Even today, Howard County has a very low homicide rate, with the city of Columbia being ranked the second safest city in the nation in 2023. For years, Elkridge seemed to embody the safety of the suburbs. But for its residents, that illusion would be shattered beginning in 1979 when the first of a string of murders would occur, targeting primarily elderly widows who lived alone in large secluded homes that would terrify the town and have everyone asking the same question: who was committing these murders? And were they the same person leaving mutilated mannequins hanging from trees? Though they were not one of the prominent families in Elk Ridge, the Clark family had lived in the area for some time when on December 29, 1955, Henrietta Clark would give birth to a son, Vernon Lee Clark. Very little is known about their family. At some point, they would move into this home on Furnace Avenue, and Henrietta would marry Samuel Carter. When Vernon entered Howard High School, he began to earn a reputation as a troublemaker and loner. He was in special education classes for his inability to read or write. Though he graduated in 1974, special ed students were not included in the yearbook or allowed to walk across the stage. In the 1970s, he would get married and move to a small apartment above a furniture store on Baltimore's Pratt Street. But eventually, he would get divorced and move back home with his mother in 1976, his wife getting custody of their 2 children. He would have trouble holding a steady job during this time, working on and off for C&S Faulkner Inc., a trash collecting company owned by Carville and Sarah Faulkner, who operated their office out of a connected room to their home since 1959. It was the afternoon of Wednesday, April 25, 1979, when a foreman entered the office to find it empty. He would use a door that connected to the kitchen to call out to Sarah. The Faulkners had 2 French poodles, and the man noticed one sitting outside the closed bedroom door. Carville had recently had open heart surgery and was confined to bed, so the foreman rushed into the bedroom, fearing something had happened. But what he found was worse than anything he could imagine. Carville was lying slumped against the foot of the bed, dead of a gunshot that passed through his neck and split the walnut headboard. Sarah had been tied face down on the bed with twine, then stabbed in the back and had her throat slit. The other poodle was found trembling in a ball beside her. Though no sign of a forced entry was found, a few shelves were left opened, and police initially were uncertain if robbery was the motive. A bank envelope with $600 cash was left lying in plain sight, while Carville's wallet had been taken, though it had no money inside. Both of their wedding rings had been taken off their fingers, but 6 mayonnaise jars full of coins had been left sitting on the dresser as well. Another theorized motive was revenge, as the 6-foot 3-inch, 300-pound Carville was known to be a gruff and outspoken man who ran business with an iron hand, never letting anyone push him around. The Faulkners had 2 daughters, one of whom lived in Nicaragua and the other attending college in North Carolina. They would put up a $10,000 reward for information. But despite over 50 people being questioned, no arrests would be made. By the 1980s, Clark had begun to do yard work for elderly women around town, while finally getting his first and only steady job at the Braun Carroll rendering plant, where he would skin animals brought in from Baltimore and surrounding counties and load them into a boiler where their fats and tissues would be collected and used for things such as chicken feed or soap. Braun Carroll would close in the early 90s when they could not meet EPA requirements, as the area surrounding the former plant here had been built up. After work, Vernon could be found at local bars, where it was said he often stank of rotting flesh, earning him the nickname of Stinky. As the United States entered the new decade, rumors still swirled that rival businesses or maybe the mob had put a hit on the Faulkners. But on January 15, 1980, something new would become the talk of the town. In the woods along Lawyers Hill Road, at the time a more wooded and secluded drive that ran behind the old Faulkner house and perpendicular to the highway, a man driving to work would discover a bizarre tableau. Hanging 20 feet up in a tree was a headless mannequin. Red paint had been smeared over the breasts and stomach, a knife left embedded in the chest. Most probably assumed it was kids fooling around, but a month later, many realized it may have been an ominous foreshadowing. 70-year-old Rebecca Davis lived in this house along Lawyers Hill Road, built by her father back in 1914, which they named Lift the Latch. Nicknamed Dolly, Rebecca had moved to Baltimore in 1938 to begin work as an artist after graduating Bryn Mawr College and touring European art museums for a year on a scholarship. But in 1941, just 3 years into her career, she stopped, as she felt it was improper to create art during wartime and attended a theological seminary, becoming a director of religious education until retiring in 1960. At which time she moved back in to take care of her mother until she would pass away in 1965. When asked if she would ever resume painting, Dolly would reply with, "I've got some talent, but I've said what I have to say." And she began tutoring remedial math to children at the Carter G. Woodson Elementary School in Baltimore on a part-time basis. It is from this very school on February 15, 1980, that Dolly would last be seen leaving. A week later, her cleaning lady would arrive to the house. Typically, Davis would give her a ride back to the bus stop afterwards. But after waiting around for several hours, she did not return home, despite her car being parked outside, and the cleaner phoned a neighbor to check around. In the backyard, the boy would find one of Dolly's shoes, and police were called. Responding officers would follow a trail of jewelry and clothing down the backyard to find Davis beside the chain link fence, just 100 feet from the I-95 highway. Now closed off by a brick wall, beside where honeysuckle flowers growing up the chain link fence, someone had attempted to cover the woman's body with sticks and brush. She had been stabbed in the neck 9 times with a short-bladed knife, such as a pocket knife, after someone sexually assaulted her. A flashlight lay discarded on the ground beside the body. Yet again, no signs of forced entry existed, nor did anything appear to have been taken. It looked as though she had been confronted shortly after returning home, as her car keys and gloves were still on the kitchen table. The cleaning woman stated she believed the killer may have spent the night inside the home, as open jars of applesauce and peanut butter had been left on the counter, and the bed was left unmade. 2 things Dolly never did. 3 days later, the same mannequin torso was discovered hanging from a tree a quarter-mile away on the same road. Police this time were able to collect it and dust for prints. The community would go into a panic. Elkridge was far enough from the city that people had felt safe, but with this murder, deadbolts would be installed. Doors were answered with a shotgun and arm. Husbands would phone home during the day to check up on their wives. 150 people attended a meeting at a local church where police told them they did not consider the mannequins and murders linked. No one believed them. Police would distribute sketches of a man seen at Davis's funeral that no one knew, while another sketch was created by a psychic that police called in. On the anniversary of her death, they would stake out her gravesite. But in the meantime, mannequins were continuing to be found. On March 15th, the legs of 3 more mannequins would be found in the woods less than a mile away from Lift the Latch. On April 16th, another torso was found 3 miles away near the intersection of Old Montgomery and Dobbin Roads. This time, it was left intact. In other instances, a mannequin splattered with white paint was found in an abandoned house. Police believe this one had been used for target practice by hunters. They also noted that the previous fall, a mannequin had been discovered floating in Bodkin Creek, about 5 miles south of Elkridge. This one had a knife stabbed in its back, In each case, the parts were collected and dusted for prints, but in only one instance was it learned who had placed it, and police simply said they had questioned that one man and released him. That summer, the church would hold an art exhibit of Davis's work, much of which had never been exhibited before, and she had put in closets, choosing instead to hang other people's art in her own home. While mannequins continued to be found every month, the news had moved on, and headlines were gearing up for the 1980 presidential election. By March the following year, John Hinckley Jr. would try to assassinate newly elected President Ronald Reagan in Washington, D.C. But just one day before that happens, according to various reports, either a couple was driving past or a local child decided to take a shortcut through the backyard of this home at the corner of DeVere and Longview in Catonsville, a small area about 5 miles north of Elkridge. 68-year-old Evelyn Dietrich had lived alone in her house for the past 8 years after her husband passed away. Despite having crippling arthritis, her family and neighbors described Evelyn as cheerful and very independent woman who had lived in this home for 20 years. A few years prior, burglars had left her tied up inside the home, and the previous year, Evelyn had noticed another person prowling around and phoned police, who caught the man inside a neighbor's home. But this time, they theorized she had heard a noise 1 or 2 nights earlier, turned on her backyard light, and stepped out in a nightgown to investigate when she was hit over the head. A single slipper was found on the back porch, and she had been dragged 25 yards back to a clump of bushes where her attacker strangled her. The phone lines to her house had been cut. A 75-pound rock was found in a different position from where it normally sat, and police theorized it may have been used to hit her, though it was so heavy only a single officer was able to pick it up. While no one would make the connection to last year's mannequin murder, it was noted that there had been a string of burglaries turned deadly the past few months against elderly residents of Baltimore County. 72-year-old Ralph Amos of Hebville had died in February from a blow to the head he had gotten when interrupting a burglar the previous November. In December, 47-year-old Violet Vandevander's husband returned home to find his wife stabbed to death in an upstairs bedroom. The home showed signs of burglary. In May 1981, residents of the northern suburb of Hampton were also frightened after a string of burglaries. So each of the some 600 houses in the neighborhood pledged $50 each to hire a private security company to patrol their streets. 79-year-old widow Catherine Burris was one such resident. Known for having a large diamond collection, her home at the end of Stratford Court had been burglarized 3 times. The most recent, just that December, when a large amount of silver had been taken and left her scared to death the thieves would return. It was Saturday, May 23, 1981, when her neighbors across the street discovered that their 2 lights at the end of their driveway had the bulbs removed. The night before, their dog had been barking at the front door, and Catherine would stop over to say she had found a cigarette butt outside her own entryway. The next evening, a woman and her daughter came over around 5 p.m. to visit Catherine. When she did not answer, they went inside to find the woman dressed in a nightgown in her upstairs bedroom. Her arms and legs had been tied with shoelaces, and her head was still bleeding from where her forehead had been bashed in. A window pane in the back of the home had been smashed, and a number of items from around the house were placed on a table downstairs, but the intruder had left it all behind, only taking some small jewelry. As Elkridge had been a year prior, Hampton was plunged into paranoia and fear. Neighbors would not open their doors, and suspiciously watched any strangers passing by, writing down their license plates. Even the patrolling security guard had gotten a report made on them. A local groundskeeper stated, This place is locked up so tight you couldn't even blow air into it. That fall, police would arrest Catherine's great-nephew Ronald Johnson and his friend Billy Rivenbark for the crime after Ronald's now ex-girlfriend turned them in. For Hampton, the killer had been apprehended, but Elkridge's murder was about to break his seemingly 3-year silence. As the unemployment rate would reach its highest since the Great Depression in 1982, no doubt burglaries in the region continued. But it would not be until 1984 when murder returned to the Elkridge area. It was Sunday, December 30th, when the neighbor of 81-year-old Iva Watson would discover her body beneath the row of pine trees on their front lawn. The widow lived across the street, at the home on the corner of Montgomery and Kerger Roads, just 2 miles northwest of Elkridge and 3.5 miles up the very same road that the Faulkners had lived on. In the weeks leading up to her murder, Iva's home had seen 2 attempted burglaries, and police believed that same person had tried to break into her house on the night of the 28th, when Iva fled and they chased her across the street to the pine trees, where they sexually assaulted her and then severely beat in her head. Police were tight-lipped about this murder, stating that they had several leads but believed her killer had changed their appearance and likely moved out of the area. Yet again, the community was not so sure, and just 3 months later, Watson's murder was recalled when 75-year-old Zula Brown was discovered behind the Oakland Mills shopping plaza in Columbia, another suburb just 4 miles from Iva's home. Zula was another widow, considered active and generous by her neighbors, seen doing her own lawn work. Police would eventually state they believed the woman had been strangled inside her home, and then her killer put her in the back seat of her car and ditched it behind the shopping center, leaving her purse with all of its contents untouched inside as well. 2 years later, Zula's 17-year-old grandson would be arrested for stabbing 20-year-old convenience store clerk Angelica Velasco to death, and police announced they were reopening Zula's murder, though they found it unlikely that David Hartless had killed her at age 14. To this day, Zula's case remains open. It was the night of July 3rd, 1989, when 23-year-old Kathleen Goulden pulled into her small apartment complex here on Washington Boulevard in Elkridge. Kathy managed the Fat Tuesdays bar in downtown Baltimore, and after work had gone to her parents' home for a crab leg dinner just down the road. The next morning, when she did not show up to work, they phoned her sister, who in turn asked the apartment superintendent to check on Kathleen when she didn't answer the phone. The superintendent would need to kick open the door as the chain was on the lock. Inside, he would discover Kathleen lying on her bedroom floor. Initially, it was believed she had been stabbed to death, but an autopsy would prove that her attacker had fired a shotgun through her ground floor window as she lay on her bed. The intruder then crawled through that window and sexually assaulted the dying woman. Another neighbor would report seeing Kathleen watching TV around 10 p.m. the night before, and other residents in the area stated they had seen 2 men seeming to loiter in various residential areas around Elkridge. Residents noted the unsolved murders total was now at 7, but the Howard County Police stressed there was no phantom killer. There are no maniacs running around the neighborhoods of Elkridge. But internally, they had not only had a suspicion that the Elkridge murders were linked, but they also had a suspect. In the apartment parking lot, police had found a pizza box left beside Kathleen's car with a woman's name written on it. That woman would tell police that she had been eating pizza that night at her house with her boyfriend and a man named Vernon Clark, who had taken the leftovers with him. On July 11th, police would track down Clark, who said he had been pulling into the parking lot that night to do drugs on his way into Baltimore. But he also let slip that he had been previously in the same parking lot, once when he was caught by police for loitering, though he claimed it was because he had to let his car cool off in the parking lot after it overheated. Another time, he said he was collecting cans and said he had glanced into Golden's apartment window, but denied anything to do with her murder. Police would visit his workplace at Braun's rendering plant, where he discovered that the boss kept a 22-gauge shotgun on the premises to kill animals hit by cars. When Clark's fingerprints matched those on the pizza box, police would get a warrant to search his property on August 9th. But Vernon flew into a rage, even biting one of the officers as he struggled. Despite his protests, DNA would be collected and sent to the FBI for testing, along with the shotgun, but he was released on his assault charge September 22nd. As DNA testing was in its infancy, the lab was very backed up, and so in January 1990, the Golden family would start a reward for information on their daughter's murder, which would seek residents also to donate, and was raised from the original $1,000 to $6,000. But her family did not need to wait long. On January 23rd, shortly after leaving his mother's house in Elkridge Heights, police would pull Vernon over on his way to work and arrest him after his DNA matched semen found in Kathleen, as did the shotgun pellets from the gun at his workplace. Police would reopen the other cases and found records that Clark had been employed by the Faulkners and had done lawn work for Rebecca Davis and Evelyn Dietrich. Clark, meanwhile, would give interviews from the Howard County Detention Center where he stated he was frequently blamed by police for any crimes that happened in the area, and he had been arrested for burglary and drug charges since 1987. He stated on the night of Golden's murder, he had been drunk on cocaine and morphine, which left him barely conscious. He stated he was with sex workers that night, but the woman he mentioned would not corroborate his statement. The owner of Braun's rendering plant told press he believed Clark was innocent and how he was afraid to use the company gun, stating, when he's released, he'll have his job waiting for him. But Clark was not released, and in April 1991 was found guilty in the murder of Kathleen Golden. As DNA testing was still in its infancy, police had nothing but circumstantial evidence in the other murders and could not charge him, but openly stated he's the prime suspect. There's also the troubling question of the two men seen loitering around the night of July 3, 1989. It was also noted in Evelyn Dietrich's murder that the rock used to hit her was so large only one officer could lift it. Clark was a short man, but described as stocky from his decades of physical labor. Of Elkridge's two other unsolved murders during Vernon's crime spree, one suspect is a Caucasian male, but in the other instance, two African American men are the suspects. The same year Clark moved back to Elkridge, it was the afternoon of November 29, 1976, when two men entered the lobby of what was then named the Bass Motel along Route 1 in Elkridge. Owner Leroy Bass would have his 11-year-old niece go and prepare the room for the men. But when she returned, those men would lock her into the office bathroom while they forced Bass into his bedroom behind the front desk and demand he give them all his cash. The men would shoot Leroy in through the back of his head, execution style, and then lock the front door on their way out. Eventually, his niece would break through the bathroom window and phone the police. Investigators would eventually update the original sketches made, but after 6 months of investigations, they were still uncertain if the murder had occurred as a random robbery or due to Bass's history of gambling. Meanwhile, in August 1991, while Clark was awaiting sentencing, an anonymous letter was delivered to the judge and defense team that stated they had been at Kathleen Golden's apartment the night of her murder, and that Clark was innocent, instead giving the description of a 6-foot, average-build, light-skinned man, which did not match Clark. A second letter would arrive, but it was determined there was no evidence to support a retrial, and in October that year, Vernon Lee Clark would receive a life sentence. It was late 1998 when police revisited the evidence. And with new technology, were able to get a hit on trace DNA found at Rebecca Davis and Evelyn Dietrich's crime scenes. In September 2000, Clark would plead guilty to Dietrich's murder. In February 2001, he would plead guilty to Rebecca Davis, receiving an additional life sentence for each. In 2014, when questioned, Clark would confess to the murder of Iva Watson and was found guilty the following year. Police still consider Vernon Lee Clark to be a prime suspect in the Faulkner murders. But a decade after his last confession, no further announcements have been made. It has never been stated if Clark had anything to do with the mannequins found throughout 1979 and 1980, and if any turned up around the later murders, they were never publicized. His mother would pass away in 1997, before she ever learned her son was a serial killer. His stepfather would pass away in 2004, his obituary not mentioning he ever had a stepson. Like most of his life, Vernon Clark has been forgotten about. But that near invisibility is perhaps what allowed the quiet man known as Stinky to the locals to get away with murder for over a decade. Proof that whether you live in the heart of the city or a small town, you can never truly be sure which person on the street is hiding a violent nature.